The dim, flickering neon sign of O'Malley's cast a lurid green glow on the rain-slicked pavement of downtown Chicago. It was the kind of dive bar that clung to the edges of the city's relentless gentrification, a stubborn holdout where the whiskey was cheap and the stories were tall. Tonight, it had been my sanctuary, a much-needed escape after another grueling week at the law firm. 2 a.m. The witching hour had come and gone. Most of the patrons had already stumbled into the night, seeking their own beds or perhaps another round at some other, less discerning establishment. My name is Sarah Miller. I was 28, a junior associate at Peterson and Davies, and currently nursing a slight, but pleasant, buzz. I wasn't drunk, not by a long shot, just relaxed, loosened, enough to not give a damn about the looming Monday morning brief that would no doubt consume my weekend. Tonight, I had allowed myself a rare indulgence, a night out with my best friend, Emily. We had spent the evening tucked away in a booth at O'Malley's, reminiscing about our college days, complaining about our bosses, and generally enjoying the freedom of a responsibility-free Friday night. Emily had already left, snagged by a handsome stranger with a charming smile and a dubious line about being a freelance art curator. I had waved them off, a mixture of amusement and mild envy swirling within me. I had intended to follow soon after, but the cozy atmosphere of the bar and the surprisingly good company of the aging bartender, a man named Frank who'd seen it all and then some, had kept me anchored to my stool. But now, even Frank was giving me the "it's time to go, kid" look. The lights had been flicked on, revealing the bar's true, less than glamorous state. Sticky floors, chipped paint, and the faint, lingering smell of stale beer and regret. "All right, Frank," I said, sliding off the stool with a sigh. "You win. I'm out of here." He gave me a knowing nod, his face etched with the wisdom of 1,000 late nights. "Get home safe, Sarah, and don't take any wooden nickels." I chuckled, a sound that echoed strangely in the suddenly empty bar. Wouldn't dream of it. Stepping out into the cool Chicago night, I shivered, pulling my leather jacket tighter around me. The wind whipped down the street, carrying with it the scent of rain and the distant wail of a siren. The vibrant energy of the earlier evening had dissipated, replaced by a sense of quiet isolation. The city, even in its perpetual motion, felt strangely deserted at this hour. I fumbled in my purse, retrieving my phone. The screen illuminated my face, a pale ghost in the darkness. 4% battery. Just enough. I quickly opened the Uber app, my fingers moving automatically through the familiar motions. Destination. Home. Type of ride. UberX. Confirm. The app informed me that my driver, a man named Daniel, driving a black Toyota Camry, would arrive in approximately 7 minutes. Perfect. Just enough time to finish scrolling through Instagram and avoid making awkward eye contact with the occasional straggler emerging from the surrounding bars. I leaned against the brick wall of O'Malley's, the rough texture scratching against my back. The street was relatively quiet. A few cars whizzed by, their headlights briefly illuminating the deserted sidewalks. Across the street, a neon sign for a 24-hour diner flickered intermittently, casting long, distorted shadows. A lone figure huddled in the doorway of a closed shop, a stark reminder of the city's underbelly that most people chose to ignore. My phone vibrated, a notification from the Uber app. Daniel is arriving now. Almost on cue, a black sedan pulled up to the curb in front of me. It was a Toyota Camry, just like the app said. The license plate, partially obscured by the dim lighting, seemed to match as well. Relief washed over me. I was tired, slightly tipsy, and more than ready to be home. The driver, silhouetted against the interior lights of the car, leaned over and pushed open the passenger door. "Sarah?" he asked, his voice muffled but pleasant enough. "Yes, that's me," I replied, sliding into the back seat. The car was warm, a welcome contrast to the chilly night air. The interior smelled faintly of air freshener, that generic new car scent that always seemed a little too artificial. I settled into the plush leather seat, letting out a sigh of contentment. "Long night?" the driver asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "You could say that," I said with a small smile. "Just catching up with an old friend." He nodded, his face still mostly hidden in shadow. I hear ya. Sometimes you just need a night out. Exactly, I agreed. So, are we all set? Yep, all set, he confirmed, pulling away from the curb and merging smoothly into the late-night traffic. As we drove, I glanced out the window, watching the city lights blur into a kaleidoscope of colors. The familiar landmarks of downtown Chicago whizzed by. The towering Willis Tower, the glittering expanse of Millennium Park, the imposing facade of the Art Institute. I knew this city like the back of my hand, had navigated its streets countless times, both day and night. The driver, true to his initial demeanor, was quiet but polite. He didn't initiate any further conversation, which suited me just fine. I was content to relax in the comfortable silence, letting the gentle hum of the engine and the rhythmic sway of the car lull me into a state of semi-consciousness. We drove for a few more minutes, the car navigating the familiar grid of Chicago streets with ease. I glanced down at my phone again. 2% battery. I quickly checked the Uber app. My driver, Daniel, was still listed as being 5 minutes away. A tiny flicker of unease sparked within me. That was odd. Maybe the app was just lagging. It happens sometimes, especially late at night. I looked up, trying to get a better look at the driver in the rearview mirror. But the angle was awkward, and the interior of the car was still too dark to make out his features clearly. "Everything okay back there?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. "Yeah, fine," I replied, forcing a lightness into my tone that I didn't quite feel. Just checking the time. I noticed something then, something that hadn't registered before. There was no phone mount on the dashboard. No GPS unit visible either. Most Uber drivers practically lived on their phones, constantly checking directions, traffic updates, and new ride requests. It was unusual, to say the least. Still, he seemed to know where he was going. We were heading south, down Michigan Avenue, the route I would normally take to my apartment in Lincoln Park. Maybe he was just a seasoned driver who knew the city like the back of his hand. Maybe he was using a different navigation app. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Then, we took a turn. A left turn onto a side street that I didn't recognize. It was a narrow, dimly lit street lined with old, brick buildings. Not a route I would have taken. Not a route any Uber driver would have taken to get to Lincoln Park. "This is a shortcut," the driver explained, as if sensing my rising apprehension. His voice, though still calm, now had a slightly different edge to it, a subtle undercurrent that sent a shiver down my spine. "Saves us a few minutes. Avoid some construction." My heart beat a little faster. Construction? At this hour? Doubtful. Very doubtful. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. The street was deserted, the buildings casting long, ominous shadows. The cheerful, familiar cityscape of a few minutes ago had vanished, replaced by an unsettling, unfamiliar landscape. My unease intensified, morphing into something colder, sharper. Fear. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. I checked the Uber app again. Still 5 minutes away. And my phone was now at 1% battery. This wasn't right. This wasn't my Uber. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. A wave of icy terror washing over me, leaving me breathless and trembling. I was in the wrong car, with the wrong driver, and I had no idea where I was going, or what was going to happen to me. My phone was dead, completely and utterly dead, just like my hope, which was rapidly dwindling with each passing, unfamiliar block. The feeble light from the street lamps outside barely penetrated the tinted windows of the Camry, casting the driver in an even more sinister light. He hadn't spoken since his shortcut explanation, his silence somehow more menacing than any threat. My mind raced, desperately trying to piece together the puzzle, to find some logical explanation that didn't involve me being the lead character in my own personal horror film. Had I been that drunk? Had I somehow hallucinated the entire Uber confirmation? No. I distinctly remembered the notification, the license plate, the driver saying my name. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to sound calm and in control. He didn't answer immediately. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of my heart, which felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low, almost soothing purr that sent chills down my spine. Just a little detour, Sarah. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. Detour? I repeated, my voice rising in pitch. This isn't a detour. My apartment is in Lincoln Park. I don't even know where we are. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the car. You're right. You don't. The knot in my stomach tightened. This was it. The moment of truth. The point of no return. I had to do something. But what? My eyes darted around the car, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. A tire iron? A heavy object in the glove compartment? Nothing. Just the meticulously clean, sterile interior of a car that felt increasingly like a prison on wheels. I tried to remember everything I'd ever read about self-defense. Stay calm. Assess your options. Look for an opportunity. But the fear was a cold, suffocating blanket, smothering my rational thoughts. Look, I said, trying a different tack, trying to reason with him, to appeal to some shred of humanity that might still exist within this stranger who had abducted me. I don't know what you want, but I'm sure we can work something out. Just let me go, and I won't say anything. I promise. He didn't respond. He just kept driving, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional squeak of the car's suspension as we navigated the increasingly uneven streets. We were definitely off the beaten path now. The well-maintained avenues of downtown Chicago had given way to narrow, potholed streets lined with dilapidated buildings and boarded-up storefronts. This was a part of the city I'd only ever seen in news reports about crime and urban decay, a place I'd always been warned to avoid. I tried to keep track of the turns we were making, to memorize the route, some desperate hope that I could somehow retrace our steps if I ever managed to escape. Left, then right, then another left. But the streets all looked the same, a monotonous blur of shadows and decay. My gaze fell on the door handle, locked of course, but what if I could unlock it? My hand trembled as I reached for the lock, my fingers fumbling with the small, unfamiliar mechanism. I wouldn't do that if I were you, the driver said, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. I froze, my hand hovering over the lock. He had seen me. Of course he had. It's not very polite to try and leave without saying goodbye, he continued, his tone almost playful, which made it even more terrifying. I slowly retracted my hand, my heart sinking. He was toying with me, playing a game, and I was the mouse, trapped in his carefully constructed maze. We drove on in silence for what felt like an eternity. Each passing minute stretched into an agonizing eternity, each turn taking me further away from safety, further into the unknown. Then, a flicker of hope, a red light up ahead, a chance, however slim, to escape. My muscles tensed, my breath caught in my throat. This was it, my one and only opportunity. I had to be ready. As the car slowed to a stop at the intersection, I surreptitiously reached for the door handle again. This time, I was prepared. My fingers found the unlock button, and I pressed it down with a silent click. The light turned green. The car lurched forward. This is my only chance. This is my only chance. My lungs burned. My legs screamed in protest, but I didn't dare stop. I didn't dare even look back. The cold night air whipped at my face, stinging my eyes and making them water. Behind me, I could hear the roar of the engine, the screech of tires, and his furious shouts, growing fainter but still terrifyingly close. I had thrown myself out of the moving car, a desperate gamble that had somehow paid off. The impact with the pavement had knocked the wind out of me, leaving me scraped and bruised, but I was alive. I was free. For now, I scrambled to my feet and ran, fueled by adrenaline and sheer terror. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away from him, away from that car, away from the nightmare that had become my reality. I ran blindly, instinctively, through the deserted streets, my only guide the dim, flickering glow of the streetlights. Each intersection was a gamble, each turn a desperate prayer. Left, right, it didn't matter. Just keep moving. Just keep running. My mind was a chaotic whirlwind of fear and confusion. How had this happened? How had I been so stupid? So careless? The questions echoed in my mind, a relentless chorus of self-recrimination. But there was no time for regrets, no time for second-guessing, only time to run. After what felt like an eternity, my legs finally gave out. I stumbled, collapsing onto the cold, hard concrete of a deserted alleyway. My breath came in ragged gasps, my chest heaving. I was exhausted, bruised, and terrified, but I was still alive. I crawled behind an overflowing dumpster, the stench of rotting garbage filling my nostrils, a small price to pay for a moment's respite, a sliver of cover in this urban wilderness. I huddled there, shivering in the cold, trying to catch my breath, trying to think. Where was I? How far had I run? Was he still looking for me? I risked a glance back at the entrance of the alleyway, my heart pounding in my chest. Empty. For now. My mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. I needed to get to a phone. I needed to call the police. I needed to get help. But how? I was in the middle of nowhere, with no phone, no money, and no idea where I was. Panic welled up inside me, threatening to overwhelm me. I fought it back, taking deep breaths, trying to calm myself down. Panicking wouldn't help. I needed to think. I needed to be smart. I remembered a small, 24-hour convenience store a few blocks from my apartment. If I could just get there. But how far was that from here? Miles? An eternity? And then I remembered something else. The text messages. Before my phone died, I had been texting with Emily, my friend from the bar. We had been planning our weekend, discussing a potential brunch on Sunday. Maybe, just maybe, she had mentioned where she went after leaving the bar with that guy. If she was still with him and her phone had juice left, it was a long shot, a desperate grasp at straws, but it was all I had. Hope, fragile but persistent, flickered within me. I had to try. I forced myself to stand up, my legs shaky and protesting. Every muscle ached, every bruise throbbed, but I couldn't give up. I couldn't let him win. I peered out of the alleyway, scanning the street. Still empty. Good. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the shadows and started walking. I didn't run. Running would only attract attention. I needed to be inconspicuous, to blend into the shadows, to become just another anonymous figure in the desolate landscape. I walked for what felt like hours, my senses on high alert. Every sound, every shadow, every movement sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept to the side streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares, my eyes constantly scanning the darkness, searching for any sign of him, of that black Camry. The city, once so familiar, now felt alien and menacing. The buildings loomed over me like silent, watchful giants. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist, taking on grotesque shapes in my imagination. As I walked, I tried to piece together the events of the night, to make sense of the madness. Who was that man? Why had he taken me? What did he want? The questions swirled in my mind, unanswered and unanswerable. But one thing was clear. I was in grave danger, and I was completely alone. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I saw a familiar landmark. A small, brightly lit gas station, its fluorescent lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. It wasn't the convenience store I was hoping for, but it was something. A sign of civilization. A chance, however slim, to get help. My heart leaped with a surge of renewed hope. I quickened my pace, my exhaustion momentarily forgotten. I had to get to that gas station. I had to get to a phone. As I approached, I saw a payphone mounted on the side of the building. Relief washed over me, so intense it almost brought me to my knees. A payphone, a lifeline. I reached into my pockets, my fingers searching for loose change. Empty. Of course. I had used my last few dollars to pay for my drinks at the bar. My credit cards and ID were likely still in the purse I'd left in that cursed car. Despair threatened to engulf me again, but I pushed it back. I couldn't give up now, not when I was so close. There was a single car parked at one of the pumps, an old, beat-up sedan. A figure was inside, filling up the tank. My only hope. Taking a deep breath, I walked towards the car, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to ask for help. I had to convince this stranger to let me use their phone. My life depended on it. The figure in the car, a man I hadn't dared to look at too closely until now, finished pumping his gas and replaced the nozzle. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, with a weathered face and a tired slump to his shoulders. He wore a worn-out baseball cap and a faded flannel shirt. He looked harmless enough, but after the night I'd had, anyone could be a threat. He turned, about to get back into his car, and that's when I made my move. "Excuse me," I said, my voice hoarse and trembling. Can I please use your phone? It's an emergency." He stopped, his eyes, magnified behind thick glasses, taking me in. I must have looked a sight, disheveled, bruised, and clearly terrified. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on the scrapes on my arms and the dirt smudged on my clothes. For a moment, he just stared, and my hope began to dwindle. Then, he spoke, his voice gruff but not unkind. "What happened to you, girl? You look like you've been through the ringer." I was attacked," I stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I need to call the police. Please, it's really important." He studied me for another long moment, his expression unreadable. I held my breath, my fate hanging in the balance. Would he believe me? Would he help me? Finally, he nodded, slowly. "All right," he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a flip phone, one of those old, basic models that were almost obsolete these days. "Here, but make it quick. I ain't got all night." Relief washed over me, so intense it made my knees weak. "Thank you," I whispered, taking the phone from him. "Thank you so much." My fingers fumbled with the unfamiliar buttons as I dialed 911. The phone rang once, twice, and then a calm, professional voice answered. "911. What's your emergency?" "I need help," I cried, the words pouring out in a torrent. "I was kidnapped. I escaped. I don't know where I am. Please, you have to help me." The operator asked me a series of questions, her voice calm and reassuring amidst my frantic explanation. I told her everything: the Uber, the driver, the escape, the gas station. I tried to describe the man, the car, anything that could help them find him. "Stay on the line with me," the operator said. "Can you describe your location? What's the address of the gas station?" I looked around, desperately searching for a sign, an address, anything that could pinpoint my location. I don't know," I stammered. "It's a gas station. I can see a sign. It says Bob's Gas, or maybe Bill's. I can't quite read it." "Okay, just stay on the line," the operator repeated, her voice calm but urgent. "We're tracking the call. Officers are on their way." Tracking the call. Right. They could do that. Relief surged through me again, a fragile hope blossoming in the darkness. I turned to the man who had lent me his phone, a silent plea in my eyes. "Do you know the address here?" I asked him. He frowned, looking around. "Yeah, it's 1472 South Elm Street. Something like that." I relayed the information to the operator, my voice shaking. 1472 South Elm Street, the operator confirmed. "Officers are en route. Just stay on the line with me, okay?" "Okay," I whispered, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I stood there, huddled in the harsh fluorescent light of the gas station, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the reassuring voice of the operator, while the man who had helped me stood a few feet away, watching me with a mixture of concern and apprehension. Every sound, every shadow, sent a jolt of fear through me. Every passing car made me flinch, my eyes scanning the darkness, searching for that black Camry. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, I saw them. Flashing red and blue lights in the distance, cutting through the darkness, growing closer and closer. The cavalry had arrived. Tears streamed down my face, tears of relief, of gratitude, of sheer exhaustion. I was safe. For now. The police cars pulled into the gas station, their sirens wailing, their lights illuminating the scene in a stark, dramatic tableau. Two officers emerged, their faces grim, their hands hovering near their weapons. "Ma'am, are you all right?" one of the officers asked, approaching me cautiously. I think so," I stammered, still trembling. They gently took the phone from me, speaking to the operator, confirming my story, getting the details. They asked me a barrage of questions, their voices calm but insistent. I answered as best as I could, my mind still reeling from the events of the night. The other officer spoke to the man who had lent me his phone, taking down his information, thanking him for his assistance. He just nodded, looking relieved to be off the hook. Then he got in his car and drove off into the night, a silent witness to a nightmare he likely wouldn't forget. As the officers led me towards one of the police cars, I looked back at the gas station, at the payphone, at the spot where I had stood, moments before, my life hanging in the balance. It had been a close call, too close. I was safe, for now, but the fear lingered, a cold, dark shadow that clung to me like a second skin. The ordeal was far from over. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning. He was still out there somewhere. The days that followed were a blur of police interviews, medical checkups, and fitful, nightmare-ridden sleep. I was physically safe, back in my own apartment, surrounded by the familiar comforts of home. But the emotional scars ran deep. The terror of that night clung to me like a shroud, a constant, chilling reminder of my vulnerability. The police were doing their best. Detectives Miller and Rodriguez, two seasoned officers with kind eyes and weary faces, had taken my case. They listened patiently to my fragmented account to find the man who had done this to me. They had retrieved the security footage from the gas station, but the quality was poor, the man's face obscured by the shadows and the low resolution. The car, an older model black Camry, was a common enough vehicle, making it difficult to trace. Days turned into a week. I tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, to go back to work, to resume my life. But it was impossible. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat, every stranger's face a potential predator. I jumped at sudden noises, flinched at unexpected touches. The vibrant, bustling city I once loved now felt like a hunting ground. My friends and family rallied around me, offering support and understanding. Emily, bless her heart, stayed with me for the first few nights, a comforting presence in the darkness. My parents, frantic with worry, had flown in from out of state, their faces etched with concern. But despite their love and support, I felt profoundly alone. No one, not even those closest to me, could truly understand the terror I had experienced, the lingering fear that gnawed at my soul. One evening, about a week after the incident, I was sitting in my living room, trying to lose myself in a book, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was an unknown number. My heart leaped into my throat. Every instinct screamed at me not to answer, to ignore it, to throw the phone across the room. But a morbid curiosity, a need to know, compelled me to pick it up. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. Silence. Just the faint hum of static on the other end of the line. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Still silence. Then, a soft, almost inaudible click as the call ended. I stared at the phone, my blood turning to ice. It could have been a wrong number, a telemarketer, a random glitch in the system. But I knew, deep down, in the pit of my stomach, I knew. It was him. I immediately called Detective Miller. He listened patiently as I recounted the incident, his voice calm and reassuring. "It was probably just a prank call, Sarah," he said, trying to soothe my frayed nerves. "Someone trying to scare you. Don't let them get to you." "But what if it wasn't?" I asked, my voice rising in panic. "What if it was him? What if he knows where I live?" "We're doing everything we can, Sarah. Hear me? We're patrolling the area, and we've put a watch on your apartment. Just try to relax, okay? We'll catch this guy." But his words did little to comfort me. The fear, dormant for a few days, had returned with a vengeance, a cold, suffocating presence that filled every corner of my apartment. The following days were a torment. Every phone call, every unexpected noise, sent me spiraling into a panic. I barely slept, haunted by nightmares of that black car, of that shadowed face, of that terrifying voice. The police investigation seemed to have stalled. There were no new leads, no breakthroughs. The man who had abducted me had vanished without a trace, leaving me trapped in a state of perpetual fear. 2 weeks after the incident, I received a text message from an unknown number. My heart hammered in my chest as I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. I almost didn't want to open it. Part of me wanted to delete it, to pretend it never happened. But I couldn't. I had to know. With a deep breath, I opened the message. It was a single sentence, a chilling message that sent a wave of icy terror through me. "I'll pick you up next time." My blood ran cold. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the floor. I sank onto the couch, my body shaking uncontrollably. He was still out there, watching me, waiting. I called Detective Miller again, my voice frantic, barely coherent. He tried to calm me down, to reassure me, but I could hear the concern in his voice this time. The doubt. They traced the number, of course. It was a burner phone, untraceable, another dead end. The days that followed were a living nightmare. I became a prisoner in my own home, afraid to go out, afraid to answer the phone, afraid to even look out the window. I saw him everywhere, in every passing car, in every stranger's face. The police increased patrols around my apartment, but it did little to ease my fear. He was out there, somewhere, a phantom lurking in the shadows, waiting for his chance to strike again. One rainy afternoon, about a month after the abduction, I was sitting by the window, staring out at the gray, dreary cityscape. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked glass, creating an almost hypnotic effect. Suddenly, a movement caught my eye. A car, slowly driving past my building. A black sedan. My breath caught in my throat. My heart pounded against my ribs. It couldn't be. It was just a coincidence. There were hundreds, thousands, of black sedans in Chicago. But as the car drew closer, I saw it. The license plate, partially obscured by the rain, but still recognizable. The same license plate I had glimpsed that night, outside O'Malley's. It was him. He had found me. Panic seized me, a cold, paralyzing grip. I scrambled back from the window, my mind racing, trying to think, to plan. But my thoughts were a jumbled mess of fear and desperation. I had to get out of there. I had to escape. I grabbed my keys, my purse, not even bothering to put on a coat. I ran out of my apartment, down the stairs, not waiting for the elevator. I burst out of the building and into the street, the cold rain stinging my face. I ran, not knowing where I was going, only that I had to get away from that car, from that man. I could hear the engine revving behind me, the squeal of tires on the wet pavement. He was coming after me. I ran faster, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. I could see the headlines now. Young woman abducted again after daring escape. I darted across the street, narrowly avoiding being hit by a passing taxi. The driver honked his horn, cursing at me, but I didn't care. I kept running. I turned a corner, ran down a narrow alleyway, hoping to lose him in the maze of backstreets. But I could still hear the car, the engine growing closer, the sound echoing off the brick walls. I was trapped. There was nowhere left to run. Suddenly, a door opened in front of me, spilling warm light into the dark alley. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the light. "Get in here, quick," a voice said, urgent and commanding. I didn't hesitate. I ran towards the open door, towards the light, towards the unknown. The door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. I could hear the car screech to a halt outside, the engine idling, a menacing presence just beyond the thin wooden door. Then, slowly, the car drove away, the sound fading into the distance. I stood there, in the darkness, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I was safe, for now, but who had saved me, and why? A hand touched my arm, making me jump. "Are you all right?" a voice asked, a woman's voice, soft and concerned. I think so," I stammered, still trembling. A light flicked on, revealing a small, cluttered room. An old woman stood before me, her face etched with worry, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of pity and understanding. "You're safe now, child," she said, her voice soothing. "He's gone." Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She smiled, a sad, knowing smile. Someone who knows what it's like to be hunted. And as I looked into her eyes, I saw a flicker of something I recognized. Fear, but also something else. Resilience. Survival. In that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to fight back, to escape the clutches of the nightmare that had become my life. But the chilling text message remained, a constant reminder that the game was far from over, leaving the ending open and deeply unsettling. This was only a temporary reprieve, and the real horror might just be beginning. He was still out there, the man in the black Camry, waiting.